Welcome, everybody, to the latest episode of the State of Hoops podcast. This is your co-host, Todd Schleckaway, along with my fellow co-host, Nate Malchow. Nate, how are you doing today?
Doing great. Got through the Super Bowl last week, the end of football, so now it's all hoops and middle of February and heading to March. So it's going to be here before we know it. And certainly we have one of the legends who has told the stories of March and basketball in South Dakota. We're happy to welcome Stu Whitney, longtime writer for the Argus Leader, longtime commentary for the State of Hoops in South Dakota. So happy to have Stu, and welcome aboard, Stu.
Gentlemen, it is good to be here. Appreciate what you're doing for basketball in the state of South Dakota. Anytime we can celebrate the sport and the athletes and the coaches and the history, I am all for it. So I'm very happy to be here.
Yeah, and we're just thrilled. We think this is going to be a really popular episode, Stu. You sharing stories from 3 decades of covering basketball in South Dakota. When I was doing some research getting ready for the podcast, I circled this. Stu has been described affectionately as opinionated, fearless, thoughtful, loved, criticized, ... always read. So a lot of opinions, Stu, but the one thing that you did was move the needle, and everybody read your work. And so we're just grateful to have you on today.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think loved was probably toward the end of that list that you read off, but it was, always important to celebrate the athletes, and sometimes that came in the form of columns, with heavy opinions, and sometimes it came in the form of more serious stuff with some of the projects we did about Native American athletes. Counting down some of the greatest games in South Dakota history, our first 5 teams. So I kind of ran the gamut of just doing game stories where I would go out to the gym and just cover the game, but I also was not shy about spouting my opinions a little bit on things throughout the state. We got a little Sioux Falls versus ESD conflicts and controversy going at times, which we'll talk about. And that was part of it. I miss those days a lot. It was that was a fun time when we had a great Argus Leader sports staff, and we had a lot of energy in the building.
Yeah, I was fortunate to be a part of a lot of work with Stu and that Argus Leader sports staff through the years, and certainly miss that. And that's what makes today very special. I mean, just being able, Stu, to have you on to relive some of those memories. And I was fortunate enough to have you at some of big games that I was lucky enough to be a part of through the years, and just have always enjoyed that relationship with you and the rest of that Argus Leader staff during that time.
Yeah, Chow. Great memories. Sometimes we tend to lean toward. When I was thinking back to some of the games I covered, I was sort of focusing on boys basketball, and then I remembered, Jesus, these are some incredible girls games that I covered through the years, and you were part of a lot of those. Not to belabor the point, but I remember when you guys won yours up in Brookings, and I'm furiously writing my column in some back classroom in the Frost Arena, and I had to fact check something, so I called Chow. Most coaches would be full into celebration at that time and would not and would ignore the caller ID saying Stu Whitney on it, but you answered the call and helped me out with a couple things to clarify, and so those are all great memories, man. I appreciated your help through the years.
Oh, and I remember when I took that call, I had to go up to I was at the front of the bus, and we had a pretty enthusiastic 45-minute bus ride home from Brookings back to Sioux Falls, and I took Stu's call, and we got some things rolling for those articles.
In
So, no.
between the shrieks, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
they were fired up, and that's okay. You win a title, and just to see that enthusiasm was awesome. But no, I could still hear you on the phone, so
That's
that was
good stuff.
And before, Stu, we kind of do a deep dive into your career covering South Dakota basketball. You're still very much connected to basketball through your son, Elliot, who's a college basketball player. Do you want to kind of give our audience, our viewers and listeners, an update on your son's career? And do you want to give an update on how Elliot's doing?
Yeah, I mean, he kind of ran the gamut a little bit from things that I covered through the years. Because I remember covering the Dakota Schoolers, Paul Seville, as Chow well knows, started that up in Aberdeen. It was an Aberdeen guy, started the Dakota Schoolers, and I covered that through the years. I went out to Las Vegas with them one year and covered them out at the big tournament, Adidas tournament out there. So my son, plays at Lincoln. He ends up playing for the Dakota Schoolers a couple summers for Buster Vincent, and ends up starts his career at Gustavus in the MIAC. Uh, won't get too much into the specifics of why that did not work out, but found a better fit at Bethany Lutheran College, which is a Division III in Mankato. He played in the UMAC, and he loves it there. He's had a really strong season. We were up there yesterday. Bethany playing Wisconsin Superior. Elliott kind of caught fire in the second half, ended up with 19 points, which is a collegiate high for him. And they've got 2 games left in the regular season, and top 4 make the playoffs, and the winner of the UMAC playoffs gets an automatic bid into the national tournament. So got some big games coming up here in the next few weeks.
Oh, and that's great to see Elliott's progress. I've known him since he was in middle school, and just watching him play on the AAU scene, and then also many games when he was part of some really good teams at Lincoln High School, and we always know that that Elliott could shoot it. So great to see that he's catching some fire, and best of luck to him as he gets into in the late part of the season.
That Schoolers team is a couple of guys starting for South Dakota State. They were on that Schoolers team that Elliott played for. Damon Wilkinson, who was just sort of kind of trying to fit into his body a little bit when he was first playing for the Schoolers, has turned into a really strong center, as you know, for the Jacks.
Mhm.
And of course, Joe Seiler, who was, once he got past the midcourt stripe, he was well within range during those summer tournaments. And so getting a chance to play with those guys, plus Spencer Barr, who's a really good player, and obviously Ollie Vincent, who's playing at Dakota Wesleyan right now, and a few others. So some good memories. We'll probably talk a little bit about summer ball and how that's changed through the years, and so look forward to kind of getting into some of that stuff.
So, Stu, let's rewind now. The year is 1990. You're originally from the state of Michigan, and tell our viewers and listeners what brought you to Sioux Falls. That I think that's the year I believe you took the job at the Argus. Is that correct? 1990.
Correct. I went to Michigan State University. Always knew I wanted to be a sports writer. I worked for the school paper at my high school, Grosse Pointe South. The Tower was the newspaper. Um, I'm one of the few people that knew all along what they wanted to do, believe it or not. And I didn't know that the actual profession was going to cease to exist about 3 decades later. But
Mhm.
I ended up I was working at Michigan State. I covered Michigan State football and basketball for the student paper there. And then I started working for the city paper, the Lansing State Journal, which was a Gannett paper owned by the Gannett newspaper chain. And so then when I graduated, I was still a student when I was working for them. And they post these listings throughout the newspaper chain. And I saw a listing for Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And I asked my editor, I said, "Have you heard of this place before?" And he said, "No, I have not." And I said, "Well, it's a full-time job. It was those were at a premium when you're coming out of college. To get a full-time sports writing job was a big deal." So I applied for it, flew out here. Greg Hansen was the sports editor there. A legendary player for Hurley High School and at Dakota Wesleyan, and interviewed with him. Went out and covered, I think, kind of a test run covering a Sioux Falls college basketball game, and ended up getting the job. It came out here, didn't know a single soul in the entire state of South Dakota, and just started. I was hungry back then. It was not. There were a lot of long hours. Uh, a lot of grinding, covering as many games as I could, working in the office. Putting out the paper, working late nights. When you're young, that's kind of, you just go on adrenaline and you kind of dream of that stuff. Those long nights and so it was kind of, I didn't think about, oh, why am I here in South Dakota? I was just happy to be a full time sports writer. And the first real basketball event that I remember covering, other than that trial run, was the state finals. And I might have covered a tournament game leading up to this, but this is the one I remember, was the state finals against it was Mitchell against Sioux Falls Lincoln. and
Hmm.
I believe it went 2 overtime. I know it went overtime. I think it went double overtime.
Two
And
overtimes. You're
yep,
correct. Hmm.
and Months and the Colonels won that one, and I was extremely impressed by the energy in the gym. You know, I don't need to tell you guys that Sioux Falls Arena
Yeah.
gets a little hot and heavy for those state championship games in a way that the Denny Sanford Premier Center can't replicate. Uh, but we'll talk about why I do think that Denny Sanford is a good place for state tournaments. But I remember I went in and talked to. I mean, obviously Munson was elated, and the Mitchell people, and we can talk about. We'll talk about Munson as we move forward. But I went in to talk to Lyle Pearson, and you know he was standing in the sort of the entryway to the locker room with his assistant, which might have been Burgard then, I can't remember, but Pearson looked like, you know, his had just suffered a family catastrophe, was very downtrodden. And I said, you know, I was just a young sports writer, so I didn't really know how to approach this. So I just said, hey, I know how you feel. And he said, no, you don't.
Hmm.
And I said, I'll always remember that. Like, okay, he's right. I didn't know how he felt, but
Mhm.
it showed you the highs and lows and the razor thin line of victory and defeat in the state championship game. And if you win it, it's a great memory for the rest of your life, and you got the trophy to show for it. If you lose it, you're still very glad you were there, but it's something that gnaws on you for the rest of your life.
Stu, I'll second that. I always tell people that was fortunate enough to coach in a lot of big games and be a part of those, and you almost remember the ones that you got beat in, and the details a lot more than the ones that you won. I mean, you enjoy the ones that you won, but the details of the tough ones that you lost, and coaches can relate to this too. You're looking back and saying, "Man, what could have I done different?" Or what can I replay? Could I have called this set? Could have I
Different
done a little bit?
inbound play or something. Yeah.
Exactly. So no, that's good perspective from your from your point of view as well and going into that. But I was at that championship night at the arena in 1990, and that Mitchell Lincoln game was 2 overtimes. The third place game with Brandon Valley and Aberdeen Central went 3 overtimes.
Oh my God. Okay, that's right. Yeah, I'd forgotten that.
Yeah,
You
so
talk about a deadline nightmare.
I was gonna say, I'm shocked you made deadline that
Yeah.
night with, because games weren't even starting until 7 o'clock at that time, but no, I was a kid at that arena watching that, and it was a loud and special place to play.
Speaking of, deadlines, Stu, like, do you recall some of your early columns or that kinda raised awareness, or you heard a lot of feedback from the people of Sioux Falls, some of the early basketball columns that you wrote that kinda moved the needle with subscribers, but also just got people talking? Is there any that stick out in those early years at the Argus?
I remember when Fred Tibbetts came to Roosevelt. He had been extremely successful at Jefferson High School at the Class B level, and was a rising star, maybe even an arrived star at the on the girls basketball coaching level. And he was hired at Sioux Falls Roosevelt. And I talked to him on the phone, and I don't think he really totally understood the demarcation between on the record and off the record, because he was just being Fred and saying all these things. And he said something like, his son Nate, of course, was going to be coming kind of a package deal, so he'd be enriching the boys basketball program at Roosevelt. And he said, yeah, Nate's a stud. They're getting a good one. And so I put that in the column, and he calls me the next day, like, why'd you put that in there? And I said, well, Fred, this is, you didn't say it was off the record. And so he thought he was concerned that it put too much pressure on Nate or made him look like he was bragging about his son. Uh, but it brought a lot of kind of more energy uh, to that hire, which he definitely, I think, changed the nature of girls basketball in South Dakota. There were small town programs that were doing the sort of year round thing. Wakanda had had incredible success uh, with Becky Flynn, and her coach and her father Ron was the coach. But in Sioux Falls, I don't know that there was sort of a system wide attention. Certainly not at Roosevelt. at that time. And so Fred came in and instituted summer basketball, where he would have one of the dads coach the team during the summer. So he's essentially keeping these girls together. He had a feeder system where he was paying a lot of attention what was going on at the junior high level, the middle schools, what girls that he was going to be were going to be playing for the Rough Riders. And then he had those girls play essentially year round, and he turned it around quickly, as you guys know. And Nate, of course, had a chance to uh, work with Fred as an assistant there at Rosie and getting his start. And I think I'm trying to remember what the second run in I had with Fred was, that you were there, Nate, and he was pissed about something else. Oh, I know what it was. It was he had taken uh, Nate, I think, was playing for USD. Either Nate or Luke was playing for USD, and he was going to go to Las Vegas to cover this tournament, or to watch his son play in the tournament, and kind of left the Roosevelt team during the season, and they lost their streak when he was gone. And I was critical of his decision to do that. I thought a coach should stay with his team. This was before I had a son that was playing basketball. I had a whole different appreciation of a lot of things once I had a son and a daughter that were involved in activities. I was just kind of a smart-ass young sports writer at that point, just rattling off takes. And I think it was actually on Mark Ovan's show that I said that. I don't know if it was in a column, but I said Tibbetts should have stayed with his team, and he, for obvious reasons, did not appreciate that insight. And I'm not asking Chow to comment on that, but I mean, it got a little hot and heavy one night after I covered a Roosevelt game outside the coach's office. So it was not just the public at large, but some of the coaches that, were not used to maybe kind of a brash style. South Dakota, a little more of a laid back media approach back then. And I think I brought a little, because I was from Michigan, grew up reading the Detroit papers. I maybe was a little more confrontational in my style. And so, yeah, that definitely did ended up butting heads every once in a while. But Fred and I, we made up down the road, which I'm glad we did.
Yeah, and I can speak to that, Stu, too. And that's when I first got to know you, just being a 22-year-old assistant coach at probably the greatest basketball program, in my opinion, that South Dakota has ever produced. That 111 game winning streak, in my opinion, I don't think that will ever be broken, at least at the AA level. It was unbelievable what they were doing there. But anyways, just getting to know you two and how you work together, and there were so many big moments. I mean that you had covered for Roosevelt and Fred, and just through that, I mean, some of the things you described there, I was around for that. But I think there's deep respect for both of you in those positions or whatever there too. And I know that I was able to witness that too. And there was a big game. Stu was going to be there, and I think Fred enjoyed that spotlight and being in a good way, just because it reflected on girls basketball and Roosevelt High School and that program. But he certainly had some great teams and some great moments, and you were right there to cover it.
Let's talk about Gary Munson for a little bit here. Another coaching icon, Stu. Your first decade on the job were in the 90s. Of course, Mitchell had a storied run in the 80s, carried it into the 90s. What stories do you have, or interactions you can share with the audience about Coach Munson?
You could do a whole show on months. I remember, mid 90s, Mike Miller was inseparable from the Munson story. It became the Mike Miller story, quite frankly. And I went up to do a profile of Mike when he was a sophomore, and did a huge story called "The Can't Miss Kid." And I went to a game that Friday. Trying to remember if it was a weeknight or whatever. I went to a game at the Corn Palace, and the next day went to the school, and Munson was looking for Mike, and he didn't call him Mike; he called him Skinny. So he's like, "Hey, where's Skinny?" And he was trying to get him so I could do an interview with him. "Hey, where's Skinny?" Walking around in the hallways, and finally we find Mike. And I sit down with Mike, and he's got all these recruiting letters, and he's going through the letters with me. He's Kentucky, uh, Kansas, obviously Florida, and all these huge major programs. And he's just kind of like an aw shucks kid, like, oh, here, look at this one. And, he had sprouted up as a freshman. I'm trying to remember. I think it was between his freshman and sophomore years, sprouted up about 4 inches. So and then became, 6'8", 6'9". And, I think, well, I think everyone thinks the greatest player in South Dakota history. And so to be there on the sort of the beginning end, the start of that legend being born, and just seeing the way he could take over a game. The interesting thing was, because he was in the Mitchell program, he didn't take over a lot of games. They still had a regimented program under Munson. It was a very kind of fascinating dynamic, because you got a very rigid coach who wanted everyone to touch the ball. He wanted at least 5 passes. You guys would probably be able to break down the X's and O's more than me, but it was a very structured offense at Mitchell, very
Mhm.
conservative. And Miller could have gone out and scored 40 most nights, and he didn't. But they did go to summer tournament. I think it was in between his sophomore and junior, or in between his junior and senior. They went to a big summer AAU tournament down in North Carolina, and he finally took the shackles off Miller, and he went off for about 54. And there were some few. I think Ronald Curry played in that tournament, who ended up being a quarterback in North Carolina. Was a really good basketball player. And there was one other guy that went to the NBA that was in that tournament. But so then we get okay. So, I think everyone knows the Mike Miller story. As far as inside stuff, senior year, if people don't remember this, they lost 3 times to Brandon Valley.
Yes.
And
Mhm.
I was at 2 of those games, and the game at Brandon was really good back in those days.
Mhm.
And the incredible fan. They still do have an incredible fan base. And that gym was just on fire, with Mitchell coming in there with Muntz and Miller. And that was about as good as it got for regular season basketball in the state of South Dakota. And Austin Hanson, you know, uh, outdueled Miller that night, and they win that game. Brandon Valley had some other good players. I'd have to look it up. Chad Creer, I think, Joe Ford. They had a couple other ones.
Oh,
But
Bo
then we get to the
Fitz,
state turn. I'm sorry.
Bo Fitz,
Oh yeah,
Chad
both
Freese,
Phipps. Yep,
those
yep.
guys. Yep, good
Mhm.
players.
Just a great team, really. But Austin
Mhm.
Hanson was the best of them. And so then you get out to Rapid City, and I remember kind of falling in love with the state tournament back then. It was an earlier year. It was an early '90s, covering a tournament out in Rapid City, and Munson would hold court at the bar they always used to go to, and he'd be over in the corner with all his cronies, and it was almost kind of like approaching Al Pacino in The Godfather or something. You had to make a make a tribute of some kind to be able to approach Munson to talk to him. But
Mhm.
it was times have changed. I'll put it that way. But so we get out there for later, when it's Miller's senior year, and it's supposed to be Miller's coronation. Here's this great player who's going to Florida, and Brandon Valley's not ready to bow down, and they beat him in the semis. I think it was Creer that hit a huge 3, maybe late in the game,
Mhm.
to win it, and Brandon Valley ends up winning the state championship. So it comes time to pick our player of the year, and I'm standing with Mick Gary and whomever else, talking about this decision, and I said, well, they played 3 times. Brandon Valley beat them all 3 times. Austin Hanson arguably outplayed Miller all 3 times. Brandon Valley won the state title. I'm going with Austin Hanson, and it was kind of I would say kind of a bold move, because as I've stated earlier, Mike Miller was the greatest player in the South Dakota history, but player of the year is for that season, and within the scope of those finite games that are played that season, I thought Austin Hanson was better, and he had the trophy to prove it, and the box scores. And so yeah, we took quite a bit of blowback for that, especially from the Mitchell people, who can be pretty vocal about their hoops.
Mhm.
Only a couple death threats, but that one I still hear about occasionally. But that was a landmark year, and I really thought that kind of the '90s in Double-A basketball in terms of the star power. And you guys talked to Jason Sutherland a few weeks ago. Eric Klein, uh, obviously Miller, and many more that I'm forgetting to mention. Was kind of a heyday. There might be some old timers that disagree with me, but that seemed like a heyday to me in terms of the level of talent and the level of interest. It was pre-live streaming. If you wanted to see a game, you had to get your ass to the gym, and those gyms were. I mean, if you didn't get there early enough, you were watching from the parking lot.
Mhm.
Yeah, Stu, I was fortunate to play in that era right in the middle of it. In fact, played against all three Millers at Mitchell, Ryan, Jared, and Mike, and some great Mitchell teams, and our conference at that time, the ESD conference, in the 90s, and Sioux Falls playing in the SIC. We didn't see any of the Sioux Falls teams until postseason, and that kind of jazzed things up a little bit as well, because we did have some battles with the Sioux Falls schools when we got to the state tournament. You said it best. We'd be in the sophomore game for most of our games on the road or at the Aberdeen Civic Arena, and sophomore kids are playing in front of a couple thousand people, and
Yeah.
it was just a special time. And by the time we get out for warmups, those gyms were packed and they were rocking. You weren't hearing your head coach on the sideline too much unless you got into a timeout situation. So no, that was a heyday of Double-A basketball, and was just awesome to be a part of it.
I'll jump in real quick on. You mentioned not playing the Sioux Falls schools
Mhm.
uh, till the postseason. 2005. If I'll jump ahead, it's another Munson thing.
Mhm.
Here comes Muntz into the Sioux Falls arena, and you've got Roosevelt with Joe Krabbenhoff and Anthony Cordova in the semis. They knock them off. Then you got OG, Mike Begman's final year. Mitch Begman is a senior. O'Gorman had not lost many games, if any, that year. I don't recall, but if they had lost games, it was one or two. Somebody can look that up for me. But the Mitchell contingent was huge as always, and there's always a little bit of an edge, with ESD against Sioux Falls, and it seems like it had been exacerbated then. You've got the basketball rivalries where they didn't feel like they were getting enough attention. I was writing a lot about Krabbenhoff, as everyone knows, and he, deserved it. He went to the University of Wisconsin, had a very fine career there, still coaching there. Um, O'Gorman was a great story for the reasons that I've articulated, but there were also some socioeconomic elements to it. With Sioux Falls being the economic engine for the state of South Dakota, and some of these ESD towns sort of losing population and in decline in some ways. So sports became a way to sort of strike back at the evil empire of Sioux Falls. And these Mitchell folks took it seriously. Munson took it seriously. Munson didn't let you talk to his players during the state tournament. Players were off limits, so it was all going through him.
Mhm.
And they that O'Gorman game, Mitchell got off to a huge lead. Mitchell didn't have any stars that year. Ryan Chrome, I think, had a really good state tournament. They didn't have any stars. Uh, Really, really, really good fundamental team, good defense, good shooting. But here comes O'Gorman in the second half. O'Gorman not only I think Begeman might have been sick that night or something. He had a bad shooting night. Um, but they had a ton of athletes. They had Tyler Schulte, who's one of the better wide receivers that come out of O'Gorman. Dusty Coleman.
That's right.
I think Coleman was there.
Yep.
And they just pressed the hell out of him, and they started forcing turnovers. And here comes O'Gorman. And I remember I thought they did something very smart. They put in Trey Creer, who didn't play much, but he was an incredible shooter on one of their final possessions. And he kind of got lost in the shuffle a little bit. And because everyone's looking for Begman to get the ball. And Trey Creer had a wide open three. And I'm sure he'll forgive me for pointing out that he missed it. And that was Mike Begman's final hurrah as O'Gorman basketball coach, and he didn't win a state championship at OG. And just seeing him after that game, I talked to him briefly, obviously downtrodden. He would have been downtrodden anytime you lose the state championship, but your last one and your son is a senior, you really kind of gauge the emotion of it. It's not just a final score. It's not just a box score. These are human beings out there, and to be able to be on the court and talking to these guys, and that's a game that really sticks with me. Just there's so many sort of swirling storylines in that game, and it's just a great basketball game.
Yeah, I was at that game as well, Stu. I was at Roosevelt at the time, my last year, and I think I was helping with crowd control for Mark Miley that
They needed
weekend.
it.
Yeah, and yeah, it was packed and it was loud. I think when you look at the dynamics of that game too, the semifinal night was, I was at Roosevelt at that time, and probably, I mean, it was a very talented Roosevelt team, and going against Mitchell, and that went down to the wire as well. But the championship game was a classic. Mitchell, and I believe that was Munson's last state championship at Mitchell, 2005.
It ended up being his last one. We didn't know at the time, obviously, but
No,
yeah,
no,
yeah, it did end up being. Yep.
no, and I think that team just kind of epitomized the Muntz way in Mitchell. I mean, they got a couple things. Munson's teams typically got hot during the postseason and during the state tournament. They're playing their best ball consistently during his tenure there during that time. The '05 team was definitely playing well, and they were dialed in defensively, which was a Muntz trademark. I mean, just tough as nails, and maybe going against some teams that might have been bigger, like you said, or maybe a little more star power, but they played really well at that time, and certainly O'Gorman had a great run that year and a great team. And again, another electric memory from the Sioux Falls Arena.
Stu, I was a Class A guy. My dad coached forever in the Class A ranks. Uh, what are your memories, or what do you recall maybe covering in the '90s? Of course, when you think Class A, you think Custer Lennox, and I'm sure you covered that rivalry on some level, because every other year they would play in Sioux Falls at the state tournament, most of the time in the state championship. Any memories or stories from that rivalry?
Yeah, I remember Larry Luchin's coming out with Lance Luchin's. I think it was Lance Luchin's senior year, and Lennox winning that game. I think Tom Rops, one of the Rops boys, was on that team, and that was a hell of a game. Luchin's uh, just always had a team that was championship ready. Chow was talking about Munson always having his team kind of hit the postseason ready to play, and it was certainly the case with Luchin's. Uh, and that the Custer Lennox rivalries were incredible. The Obviously, one of the more tragic things that occurred during my time as an Argus sports writer was the Derek Paulson, great player for Custer, being killed in a car accident. And I did a story where I kind of talked about how that shook that program to the core for obvious reasons. Fred Paulson was an assistant under Lance Luchins, and had to deal with the loss of a son. Fred is a Michigan State guy, coached at Michigan State, so he and I had some connections through that. And then you've got Paige Paulson, Derek's younger brother, who's kind of coming up and sort of carrying that mantle and all the pressure that was on his shoulders because of being, inevitable comparisons. And he ends up leading Custer to a state title, I believe. So Custer had things, incredible storylines. You got to start with the coach. You got to start with a coach that sort of sets the tone for the program. The old Silver Fox Luchins, winning as coach, South Dakota history during his time, and he actually was staying out at what they now call Legends at Lake Lorraine. They used to call Grand Living Retirement Center, where my mom was living. So I actually spent some time with Larry out there, and just an encyclopedia of knowledge. And that's when I think Class A boys, that one jumps out at me. Um, I also think about some of the native teams in Class A. I went out and did a story on Jeff Hart from
Mm.
Little Wound, who was, a guy that had an incredible state tournament and became kind of a shooting star off the reservation. And I did a story on how a lot of native players have trouble making that transition from high school basketball to college, and are drawn back quite often to uh, cultural traditions of the reservation. They have trouble, uh, making that academic transition and athletic transition to different forms of basketball. And so I was able to go out there and spend time with Jess Hart. Hung out with him and his family and his buddies, and they were playing pickup basketball. And you really get a sense for the pride on Pine Ridge and Rosebud and some of the other reservations, and you still see that. And all the great players that have come through. I hesitate to name many because I'll miss so many. But Terry Dupree, Dusty LeBeau, incredible coach, Willie White, just incredible history that we have here, all the way back to like Freddie Knife. And I think people are remiss in not, if they don't, a lot of people do appreciate uh, the Native American basketball tradition and how that enhances South Dakota's basketball. Uh, to have that element and the fact that they are, especially in Class A and I guess Class B, still a huge part of, if you're going to go through the state tournament, you're going to have to beat some of those teams, and you have to be ready to run up and down the floor and face some incredible basketball ability. I think that enhances South Dakota basketball.
Oh, no question, and I've always enjoyed going to the Class A state tournament, and in the Lakota flag song, Stu, is played before every session, and you just don't see that at the double A games, and sometimes the state B games either. So it does add to the cultural history. And we had an episode earlier this season on the Lakota Nation invite and the significance of it to basketball, and so I appreciate you mentioning that. We're going to transition now to several sponsor ads. Charles Schwab, looking for trusted financial guidance close to home? Visit Charles Schwab's Sioux Falls, South Dakota branch, your local investment firm led by Lonnie Struckman and Zach Hansen, financial consultants with over 25 years of combined experience. Their team is here to help you reach your financial goals. Whether you're planning, investing, or just have questions, Lonnie, Zach, and their team put clients first every time. Call 605-231-4844 or search Schwab Sioux Falls at schwab.com to book your appointment today. Charles Schwab, own your tomorrow.
And I also want to take a moment to thank the team at Insight. They're the folks that helped us with the visual assets to bring this podcast to life. And I can tell you, they don't just make things look good. They're going to dive in, ask the right questions, and come back with great ideas that actually work. Whether it's branding, campaigns, or creative strategy, Insight has a way of helping businesses stand out and connect with people in meaningful ways. If you're looking for a partner to make an impact on your business, check them out at insightmarketingdesign.com.
And you're listening to the State of Hoops podcast with special guest Stu Whitney. Let's fast forward now, Stu, to your second 2 decades on the beat. And first off, just kind of big picture question. The explosion of basketball in Sioux Falls and South Dakota specifically, when it came to some of the facilities you saw being built and the club programs, what are your kind of overall thoughts on what you observed? I'd be interested to hear your perspective, as you had a front row seat to a lot of that.
Yeah, I mean, I remember when go back to Miller. I remember Mike Miller kind of having an advantage because his dad was a middle school principal, and he had keys to the gym. Just having access to a gym was a big deal back then. So when you've got a facility that goes up like the Pentagon with a multitude of gyms, in addition to some other facilities that went up around Sioux Falls, it really kind of changes the equation and allows for more year-round play and more specialization. There's a lot of people that disagree with that framework. A lot of people that think you should be uh, playing 3 different sports. Play baseball during the summer if you're an athlete. But I think in Sioux Falls, what it did was open up that avenue for people that wanted to really dive into basketball to do that. And there was a proliferation of summer teams And, when I started, or Nate knows this very well, there was maybe one or two summer AAU teams in South Dakota. You had the Schoolers, and I think you were on the South Dakota Stars, Chow, and
Yeah.
then you
Schleck
had the
was as well. Yeah.
yeah, the South Dakota Heat, came on, and that was a big deal. But now you've got, you know, dozens of summer teams. So there were many, many opportunities for someone to become a quote unquote serious basketball player. Now, whether that translated to living up to that potential and all that training and actually getting it done on the hardwood, that's mixed results. But certainly it changed the game. Now, but you look at where the girls are now, girls basketball, Lincoln having trouble fielding a team. Uh, Volleyball is sort of taken over as the sport du jour. And that's become kind of a specialized year-round sport in some ways. And the amount of attention that basketball takes in terms of skill level and learning it to be a force on the court, um, not something that everyone wants to undertake. I think in the smaller towns, you see girls that grow up because they're their older brothers played or the older sister played. It's more of maybe of a generational thing. So I don't think it's dying out as much at that level, but I do think in some of the cities in Sioux Falls, you know, all the facilities in the world can't force interest in a sport. And so I know that there are girls basketball coaches, and Chow knows this better than I, that are concerned about the state of the girls' sport right now. So I don't think facilities necessarily gave Sioux Falls an advantage. I mean, uh, but it gave players an advantage to be able to undertake that. And then you wonder about, does it become an economic thing where if your parents don't make enough money, you're not part of that world. And I think there's some truth to that. So it came with problems as well, and it came with demarcation of certain social castes, and so it's a complicated. When people just say, "Oh, Sioux Falls has all these great facilities, so they should be better in basketball," it's a much more it's a much more complicated discussion.
Mhm.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's I would tell you, just with when we were in high school, Stu, and I remember you covered that South Dakota Stars, Team South Dakota, that Schleck and I were on back in the mid '90s. Dakota Schoolers, Paul Seville really got things rolling with the AAU club programs, and then Paul was able to have multiple teams, but that just wasn't going on back in those days. If you even went to a team camp with your high school team, that was a big deal. And to see what's happened now in the last 30 years, where you can't go a weekend if you got kids who are involved in sports without having a tournament. I mean, it's that landscape has completely changed in South Dakota and in our area.
And really, if you contrast that with the golden era, the '90s, like we talked about, I don't know if the players are are better or worse or better athletes, but it's an interesting point you raised, Stu, because I think you're right. I mean, it it the f- y- the diversity of Sioux Falls alone, we all live in Sioux Falls, has really changed. Chow walks the halls at Washington High School every day, and that has added, I think, to the basketball landscape in South Dakota and Sioux Falls specifically. I go to these youth tournaments with my 2 younger boys, and, some of the athleticism is just off the charts, and so it's just a different place than when you came in 1990 for sure.
Yeah, I mean, you see. I remember I did a story at Roosevelt when Bob Wilbur was the coach, and God, you might have to help me out with the last name. Was it Telly?
Kelly Michael.
Oh,
Telly
yeah.
Michael was the
Yep.
assistant, and they had brought in they had a bunch of Sudanese players
Mhm,
uh,
mhm.
that were sort of breaking the color barriers to a certain extent, s- and it was fascinating to see some of these guys that had not played. Basketball was kind of a new sport to them, but they're long or athletic, and they want to learn, and they're playing all the time. They're in the gyms working hard, and it was fun to
Mhm.
see sort of that take flight at Rosie, and sort of the early stages of some of the diversification that you pointed to, Todd. Telling Michael's a fascinating character. We probably don't have time to get too much into that, but now that we're in the 2000s, I did want to, before I forget, I want to mention Louis Krogman,
Mhm.
Louis Legend, and you mentioned the Lakota Nation Invitational. That was one of my favorite things to, one of my favorite memories was covering that tournament the year he broke the all-time scoring record. Don Jacobson from Lake Norton held that record for 50 years. Some people consider it to be unbreakable. Louis Krogman highly disagreed because he broke it, I think, his junior year.
Mhm.
And I was John Thune was at that tournament. I was sitting with John Thune and watching that, and Louis. It was almost a shame that he broke it from the free throw line. You know, you'd like to see him stroke a three or something, or hit a floater to break the record. He missed the first free throw, and they made the second, and they honored him with the traditional shawl afterwards, and gave him his Lakota name, and just a night you don't forget. I mean, obviously, he hasn't forgotten, and I
Mhm.
haven't either. Being there, great night in South Dakota history, and I thought encapsulated some of the things we talked about with the Native influence on South Dakota basketball. So I wanted to make sure I didn't forget to mention that memory.
Mhm. Yeah, that's a scoring record now on the boys' side. That we had Becky Flynn Jensen on an earlier episode, Stu, and she talked about how when Jill Young broke her record, we may be waiting a while for anyone to be in Louis' zip code on the boys' side. That's pretty remarkable what he accomplished. Any other teams or coaches or players that stand out in the kind of the latter part of your time at the Argus, Stu? I know Lincoln had some undefeated teams there that were pretty memorable on in Double A. Anyone else stand out?
Yeah, you had the perfect Pats. Luke Hanneman was on that team, who's now coaching the Pats, and trying to remember the year of that now, which is bad. I should know that, but I remember we did um, our state tournament preview. We did, you look at what the Argus is now, and then it's
Mhm.
remarkable that we used to put out a special section just for the state tournament, full color pull out section, and I went to the party store and bought these patriotic Uncle Sam hats and U.S. and
I
American
remember that.
flags.
Yeah.
And I had to convince Robin Burgard to let me do this. So I come busting into practice a couple days before a state tournament with all these American flags and say, "Hey, I want to take a picture of your boys." And Burgard, to his credit, allowed it to happen. And it ended up being a really cool cover where it
Mhm.
said "Perfect Pats" and they had their stuff on, and it had kind of put a target on their back. I mean, the obvious goal of every other team was to make sure that they were not the perfect Pats by the time that tournament was over. And they almost lost in the first round. I can't remember who they played, but they were down
Mhm.
and they
Mhm.
rallied to win. You know, sometimes those noon starts, 1 p.m. starts on Thursday, the state tournament, sometimes you kind of get caught in the first round jitters,
Mhm.
and they almost lost that game, but they came back and won it and won the whole thing. So that was a very special team. Weren't a lot of teams running the table back then. This year's Lincoln team is trying to live up to that memory, and that's a great story. You got a coach who was on the perfect path, trying to keep them perfect.
Mhm.
Um, maybe help me out here, Chow, with a couple more teams that I should be talking about here.
Um, I'm just trying.
Washington girls, we could talk about certainly.
Well, you covered all of our tournaments, Stu, when we were
Yeah,
there, and I mean, if there's one that probably sticks out to me, Stu, working with you, I guess, anyways, with our teams is and I still talk a little bit with John Gaskins about this because he was up there, but the 2010 state tournament up in Huron, and you were up there the whole weekend for that one. That was the tournament where the fifth through eighth seed all won. And I think we were the fifth seed that year and we ended up winning it. But I don't know if that's ever been done before or since, where the 5 through 8 seed beat the first through the fourth seed. And it was just kind of a crazy tournament, but I remember you were up there with us in that venue, which is a
3 days in
historic.
Huron. That's should get a medal for that alone. But
Yep,
you got you play Rapid City Stevens in the championship?
we did. Yes, Donovan DeBoer was the head coach, and they would have Margaret McLeod, who played on that USD NIT winning championship team, was a good player there, and it was just one of those tournaments where we were all young at that time. I think Rachel Walters, Sadie Stotesbury, and we were a team that took lumps early in the season. We got hot at the right time, but you were there, and I just remember talking to you after each game, and John Gaskins was there at KWSN at that time too. So whenever I see him, we always reminisce on that tournament a little bit too. So
I can give you a couple rapid fire ones that
yeah.
state tournament memories was. You talk about ESD versus Sioux Falls. Huron and O'Gorman were really getting into it this year when Newton was a senior, I believe, and I think Alex Roby was a senior. Alex Roby was a top player at O'Gorman anyway. There was an incident at O'Gorman where it was an elbow thrown, and Newton is doing a great job at the Pentagon, by the way, coaching, and has worked with Ellie a little bit. So I'm not going to disparage him at all, but I think he was accused of throwing an elbow. And this was the kind of how things had changed because somebody sent me video. I didn't cover that game. Somebody sent me video uh, of this, and so we posted the video on social media, and that enraged Budenhagen and the Huron community, and it turned into quite a deal. And so then you get to Huron OG playing out in Rapid. I believe Mick Gary was covering it that year. I was at the arena, and I think Roby did a hard foul on one of the Huron players, and it became that's when tensions were really, really running high, and that was a good example of Sioux Falls versus EID. ESD tensions sort of boiling over. So that one jumped out at me, and another one quickly. Another ESD Sioux Falls thing is when Roosevelt, kind of the tail end of the Roosevelt dynasty in girls. Chris Clark was the coach. Tournament up in Watertown. And obviously, we're a Sioux Falls paper. We're giving Roosevelt quite a bit of coverage. They were the number one seed. And I remember getting up there and I'm surrounded by Watertown people saying, how come you didn't write about the arrow? Lee Schoenbeck, state legislator, prominent lawyer up there, good guy. I remember him being very vocal about, hey, what about the arrows? And I was like, yeah, let's just focus on the teams that have a chance to win this thing, yada, 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 yada. Roosevelt gets beat in the first round and kind of a deer in the headlights type thing. And Watertown goes on to win it. And so it was basically 3 days of me eating crow up to ESD people at the Watertown Civic Arena, pretty much 24/7. So there are pleasant memories and not so pleasant memories, but I mean, it was fun to watch a local team rise to the occasion and get that. That's one where you have a genuine home crowd advantage at a state tournament, which you don't see very often.
Yeah, and I remember those teams with Tara Heiser and Pat McClemens, their boys coach now, was their girls coach. And yeah, I remember being up there. We didn't, I think that was our first or second year at Washington, so we didn't make the tournament those 2 years, but was up there.
Who was the girl that went from Watertown that played at USD? She was a freshman that year.
Ty He Miller.
Exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, she was a freshman.
Mm-hmm.
And you mentioned Heiser. They had some really skilled players.
They were very, very good. And we know McClemens and the type of coach that he is. Those were some tough teams.
Well, thanks for sharing those stories, Stu. We're going to transition to a few more sponsor ads at this time. Park Bench Apparel. Looking for high-quality custom gear? Look no further than Park Bench Apparel, your South Dakota-owned print shop. Park Bench Apparel specializes in screen printing, embroidery, laser and UV printing, plus unique giftware for every occasion. Outfitting your company or team? They have got you covered with fully customizable team stores and corporate apparel. Find Park Bench Apparel at all SDHSAA events and follow the action on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. Park Bench Apparel, wear an adventure.
And for over 30 years, Pat and Pam Tiefenthaler of Tiefenthaler Real Estate with Hague Realtors have been trusted names in and around the Sioux Falls community. Building relationships that last, they're humbled and honored to serve buyers and sellers with care and expertise. Whether you're a first-time home buyer or navigating a move because life happens, Pat and Pam will walk beside you, guiding you every step of the way. Call Pat or Pam at Tiefenthaler Homes with Hague Realtors today, your trusted partners in Sioux Falls. Visit tiefteam.hague.com or call 605-321-0550.
Love South Dakota hoops? Discover the legacy at the South Dakota High School Basketball Hall of Fame, a nonprofit dedicated to preserving our state's rich basketball history for generations to come. Visit their incredible exhibits at the Sanford Pentagon at Sioux Falls and explore stories, milestones, and legends online at www.sdbbhof.com. From iconic players and coaches to unforgettable teams, this is South Dakota basketball. Again, check out the organization's rebranded website and be part of the tradition.
Give and go.
All right, Stu, this is one of the most popular segments we do. We call it the give and go segment. It's kind of a rapid fire back and forth. And we're going to have some fun with you here for a few minutes on this segment. So the series of questions are going to be under this broad topic of if Stu were the czar of South Dakota high school basketball. So what if you were the czar, give us one thing you would change immediately.
All three classes would be in one site for the state tournament. You would have, it would be rotating between Sioux Falls and Rapid City. I initially said it should all be in Sioux Falls, but I told Nate Brown out there if they build a new building, then I would include Rapid City. So fair is fair. Rotate back and forth. You've got, you either get rid of the consolation rounds or you farm them out. In Sioux Falls, you play them at the Elman Center, the Pentagon, or what have you. The main tournament is at the Denny Sanford Premier Center. You've got 6 semifinals on Friday. Obviously, you start a little earlier. And then you've got yourself a Super Saturday on Saturday with 3 state championship games. You can sort of mix up or rotate what order those games are played in. I think it's really kind of unconscionable that we have state tournament games, state championship games going on at the same time in different arenas, different cities, where neutral fans of South Dakota basketball, unless they have some sort of high tech setup, can't watch all these games at the same time, or can't watch all these games. I think it would be, the South Dakota Activities Association's job is to showcase the athletes and put on the best experience for the athletes and the fans. It's also to stir revenue, and I think this would spark more revenue. So I know that this, I know Chow disagrees with me as an Aberdeen boy, and I know the Aberdeen folks get all riled up every time I mention this on Twitter. But I'm going to be consistent and say that's what I would change.
Yeah, and that's a topic that probably isn't going away. Thanks for sharing your thoughts on that. What are your thoughts, Stu, on in the context of basketball, this whole debate about success factors, letting teams in one class go up or down, or making them, I guess would be a better way to put it, based on their success. And it seems like that's a topic that's not going away anytime soon, as we've seen some of the private schools located in the population centers in South Dakota have success. Any thoughts on that topic?
I will say that I don't follow it as closely as I used to. I will say I think it's more of a football issue in terms of relegation or unfairness of some of these classes. It becomes almost a safety issue in football. Sometimes it becomes it's more of a program wide sport and a numbers sport. Basketball, you got one good kid, or 1 or 2 good kids moving to town. Your program changes. So um, I do think that the private school thing, other states have changed their classification formula where each kid, each student counts 1.5 or something at the private school level. That's been looked at and acted upon in other states. I think there's something to be said for that, but I haven't followed it closely enough over the last 5 years to really speak intelligently on where they're at right now with that.
And Stu, I got one last rapid fire question for you. Just being one of the czars of the media, covering all these tournaments, what is your most memorable boys game that you covered? And secondly, what's your most memorable girls game that you covered?
Well, the boys game, I hate to repeat myself, but it might be that game at uh, the Sioux Falls Arena with Gorman and Mitchell and Mike Begeman's last game. I will say, just going to the Corn Palace and watching Miller play, and having Munson stalking the sidelines, and I'd be on the scorer's table, and Munson would always come over and say hi to me before the game. He's one guy that everyone hated me in Mitchell, it seems like, except for Gary Munson, because Gary Munson understood, kind of like the guy I'm writing about a book about right now. Munson understood, uh, you know, publicity. Just don't spell. Just make sure you spell my name right. Just keep writing about me. Uh, and he knew it was good for basketball in South Dakota to write. A little controversy never killed anybody. He knew that better than anyone. And so I think he liked my style, quite frankly. And so he and I got along quite well. And just seeing him operate, and obviously, kind of an anachronism where I don't think you'll see many coaches like Muntz or like Bob Burns again. The way they motivated, even though it was very harsh at the time it happened. You talk to former players, they look back upon their time there and they have nothing but positive things to say. Yeah, it was hell to go through when they went through it. Uh, but it shaped them as human beings, and they have fond memories. So I look back at the, not necessarily games, although the Duke games do stand out. I look at some of the coaches, Fred Tibbetts, Gary Munson, Larry Luchins, Nate Malchow, guys that made their mark. And a bad coach can mar your basketball experience. A great coach can elevate it. And we've had some great ones in South Dakota.
Well, thank you for participating in that give and go segment, Stu. And kind of as we wrap up, we want to talk about your legacy a little bit. And what are you most proud of, Stu, in the 30 years you covered, uh, basketball in South Dakota? The amount of sweat equity you put into it, with these feature length stories and the big games, telling the story of what makes basketball special in South Dakota. What are you most proud of?
I think I'm proud of the team that we built at the Argus. We talk about basketball teams. We had a pretty good team. Mick Gary, I mentioned earlier, uh, Matt Zimmer, Terry Vanderbeck,
Yeah.
Ron Hoffman, kind of the guy, heartbeat behind the scenes.
Oh.
Uh, Adam Thaler was there for a while. Chris Solari was there. I'm worried about forgetting people here, but I think people know what I'm saying. That we had kind of a dream team for a while there at the Argus, and we took these events seriously. When we had the state tournament, we would come out with a special section for the state tournament. Then we would do the same for the Summer League tournament. Then we would cover all that. Then we would do the same for the NCAA tournament if South Dakota State made it. March was very little sleep in March. We'll sleep in May, as John Rothstein says, and that was certainly the case at the Argus. Then you come out with the first 5 teams, and one of my great regrets about the uh, extinction of the Argus leader as we knew it is that you're not going to have the tradition of the Elite 45 in football, and the first 5 and second 5 in basketball, and the Player of the Year, and being able to look back and compare all these great players and teams from past years and how they stack up. You lose that. It's not just, I'm not going to see my kid's name in the paper. You lose the history. You lose the perspective, the historical perspective of what these sports, high school sports, have meant in South Dakota. So that's a regret of mine that that's not going to continue. But I'm very proud of how we did cover it when we were there.
Oh, and everybody, I'm so glad that you mentioned that, Stu. And one of the funnest parts of my coaching career here was, building those relationships with you and, Zim and Mick and all those guys on the Argus Leader staff. And you would come to the games, and best part is you gave pub to our girls. And I tell you what, your girls basketball coverage was phenomenal. And you really put, girls in a great position at during that time, that they were getting equal coverage compared to the boys. And I think that's a very, very important piece with what you did and what your staff did. So, I mean, just thank you from the girls basketball coaches, the players, all of that, because you guys certainly covered that. in a great way in this area and around the state.
A lot of people thought that was going to not be the case when they moved the girls basketball from the fall season
Mhm.
to the winter season. They thought they were going to get lost in the shuffle with the boys, and so we were determined for that not to be the case. And if there were not great players or teams or coaches to write about, it probably wouldn't have happened. But you only have you only work with the material that you have. So I appreciate you putting some good teams on the floor.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're an accomplished author, Stu. Your writing career is still ongoing. We want to give you an opportunity to talk about some projects you're working on. I know you have a book under development. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I took a voluntary buyout from the Argus in December of 2020, and thought about writing a nonfiction book then, but I wanted to turn something around fairly quickly, and I thought maybe better to do kind of a fictional memoir where I was able to talk about my career in journalism and some of the political things that were going on in South Dakota, and basically some things I wanted to get off my chest. And we we talked about sort of the way that journalism, the industry of journalism has changed. I tackle about some of that in the book. I tackle some of the things that a lot of conflicts that people encountered during the pandemic. So anyway, it was a novel called The COVID Chronicles,
Mhm.
still available on Amazon and at Zambros downtown and a library near you. So if you want to pick that up, that would be tremendous. But then I said, okay, now I've got a little more time. I worked for South Dakota Newswatch for a while. Uh, Now I'm writing, hope to be an author full time, and I wanted to do nonfiction, which is kind of one of my favorite things to do, is heavily research a topic and sort of lay it all out. And so Bob Burns is someone I had written quite a bit about before. I wrote a long article on him in 1996. It might have been, I think, maybe the longest article that's ever appeared in the Argus Leader.
Mhm.
And he called me a few weeks later and said, "Yeah, that was a nice write up." He goes, "You should write a book about me." I said, "Bob, I just did, basically." I mean, uh, but I continued to talk to his son, Bob Burns Jr., who passed away a couple years ago, and we had talked about a book. And now then I started talking to his grandson, Patrick Burns, who's a lawyer in Minneapolis. Finally, I decided to pull the trigger on it, and I just finished chapter 26 today, and it's going to be coming out in a few months here, and it's called The Great Burns, and I'm very excited about it, and I think there's going to be a ton of interest. I did about 80 interviews. You're talking going back to the Washington High day. He coached Washington High, obviously a war hero, grew up in Sioux City, coached Washington High in the 1950s, coached Augustana to its only NCC title ever in 1959, uh, and then made his triumphant return to O'Gorman in 1976 and led them to their historic state championship in 1981 at the Dakota Dome. Uh, you'll hear much more about it. I don't need to give you the whole story here, but I'm very excited about it. And people will be hearing more about when they can pick up a copy of that and all that. So I appreciate you letting me talk about that for a few minutes.
Stu, I'm going to hit on that for a minute here too, just because I'm a Washington guy now and I've been a part of the community for 21 years. Bob Burns' impact at Washington High and in our athletic traditions lives on to this day. I mean, I hear stories, as many stories about Burns and people that have played for him or played. It was a national football schedule, which you'll hit on in your book and all of those things. But the impact that Burns has had on Washington High School in our tradition here is just tremendous. And we still get stories on him to this day and know some of those players, Louis Simcoe, some of those guys, I believe that played for him back in the day. So personally, I am as a sports fan, but as somebody who appreciates the history of South Dakota sports, and I'm looking forward to checking that book out. So keep us posted. We're happy to talk about that a little bit on the podcast and plug that too. So looking forward to it, Stu.
You will get your signed copy, Chow. Don't worry about that.
Yeah, I got my
Todd might
signed
have to
copy.
pay for his, but you're going to get a signed copy.
I got my signed copy of the COVID Chronicles, so and
All right.
which
Yeah, I
was
forgot about that.
outstanding. Yeah, which is outstanding work. So looking forward to getting another signed one of this. Great stuff.
Appreciate it, man.
We will definitely buy a couple copies. I want to give a copy to my dad, who I believe crossed paths with Bob Burns back in the day as well in the coaching ranks. Stu, we can't thank you enough for taking time. As we're recording this, our listeners and viewers should know it's Stu's birthday today, and he took time out to record this episode with us. And South Dakota basketball is so much better off because of the 3 decades of coverage that you personally provided and your colleagues at the Argus Leader. But we just can't thank you enough for sharing these stories with us.
It's been great. I mean, kind of surprised myself some of the stuff that I remembered, and so I appreciate you allowing me to walk down memory lane a little bit. And they're all positive memories of kind of bringing these teams and athletes to people's attention. And I appreciate you guys allowing me to be on. And thanks for the invite.
Yeah. And Stu, just again, thank you so much. And more importantly, thank you for your friendship through the years too. And certainly have been through some tremendous highs and some tough times with you. And I've always appreciated that through the years. So thank you very
Right
much for
back
taking
at
the
you.
time. Yep.
Thank you, Chow.
Thanks again, Stu Whitney, for joining us on this episode of the State of Hoops podcast. We're confident that South Dakota basketball fans are really going to enjoy that conversation, and we appreciate Stu for sharing his insights and stories with us. Just a programming note as we wrap up this episode, Nate and I both have work commitments and some travel conflicts next week, so we will not have an episode that will be released next Wednesday. Our next episode to be on the lookout for will be released on Wednesday, March 4th. Stay tuned in to the State of Hoops podcast as we have some great March Madness content scheduled for the entire month of March that we're excited about. And just a reminder, please do subscribe to the podcast on YouTube, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, iHeartMedia, and Amazon Music. And please follow us on YouTube, X, and Instagram. Until next time, this is your State of Hoops podcast co-host Todd Schleckaway. Have a great day.